There was a decade when the United States didn't just build cars, it built statements of power. The 1950s were an era of optimism, economic growth, and absolute confidence. Highways stretched farther every year, families were thriving, and some automakers decided to push luxury to a level that bordered on the irrational. But here comes the uncomfortable question. How much was someone willing to pay for a car in 1955? Because on this list, we're not talking about expensive cars by today's standards. We're talking about cars that, at launch, cost more than houses in many states. 1955, Chrysler C300. This is where luxury begins to dangerously blend with something unexpected, real performance. In 1955, the C300 had a base price close to $4,100. That might not sound outrageous compared to other cars on this list. But in 1955, that would equal roughly $47,000 to $58,000 today when adjusted for inflation. And that clearly placed it above most normal cars on the market. But what made the C300 interesting wasn't just the price. It was what you got for that price. Visually, it was restrained, formal, almost executive. No exaggeration, no theatrics. But under the hood, it hid something entirely different. It came equipped with the legendary 331 cubic inch HEMI V8, fitted with dual carburetors and producing 300 horsepower. In 1955, 300 horsepower in a formal luxury coupe. That made it the most powerful production American car at the time. And it wasn't just marketing. It dominated NASCAR that very year, proving it wasn't slow luxury, but a true missile in a tailored suit. Production was limited, around 1,725 units in 1955. That made it exclusive from day one. Today, a well-preserved Chrysler C300 typically ranges between $70,000 and $120,000, depending on originality and documentation. It wasn't the most expensive car of the decade, but it was one of the first to prove that luxury and power could exist on the same level. And in 1955, that was revolutionary. 1957, DeSoto Adventurer. Now, we step into very interesting territory, because the Adventurer wasn't just expensive, it was excessive. In 1957, its price hovered between $3,900 and $4,100, depending on equipment. Adjusted for inflation, that equals roughly $44,000 to $58,000 in today's dollars. It wasn't the single most expensive car of the decade, but it was easily one of the most extreme within the Chrysler family. Visually, the Adventurer represented everything the late 1950s were becoming: pronounced tail fins, generous chrome, a low and aggressive stance. It wasn't discreet, it wasn't formal, it was flashy, almost theatrical. But what truly mattered was beneath the hood. The Adventurer packed a 345 cubic inch V8, producing about 345 horsepower, 1 horsepower per cubic inch, in 1957. That placed it directly among the most powerful American cars of its time. It wasn't just beautiful and expensive, it was genuinely fast. And here's an interesting fact: production numbers were extremely low. In 1957, approximately 300 units were built. That makes it one of the rarest high-performance, full-size cars of its era. Today, a well-preserved 1957 DeSoto Adventurer can easily surpass $120,000, with exceptional examples climbing even higher at auctions. It wasn't a massive commercial success. It didn't save the brand. But it made one thing very clear: DeSoto was willing to compete in the world of high-powered luxury, without asking permission. 1958, Pontiac Bonneville, fuel injected. Now things shift again. Because this wasn't simply an expensive car, it was a technological experiment sold directly to the public. In 1958, the Bonneville had a base price close to $3,800, but when equipped with the Rochester fuel injection system, the number could easily climb past $4,000. Adjusted for inflation, that equals roughly $44,000 to $58,000 today. And that placed it firmly in serious territory within the American market of the era. Visually, the 58 Bonneville already hinted at a new decade: bigger, lower, wider, with an imposing presence and a design that blended elegance with subtle aggression. But what truly shocked people was under the hood. The mechanical fuel injection system allowed its 370 cubic inch V8 to reach approximately 310 horsepower. In 1958, that was an impressive figure for a full-size luxury car. It wasn't just looks, it was real performance. And here comes the detail that makes it especially important within this video. The fuel-injected versions were extremely limited. It's estimated that only a few hundred were equipped with this system, making them incredibly rare pieces even within the Bonneville lineup. Today, a well-preserved 1958 Pontiac Bonneville typically ranges between $50,000 and $90,000, but properly documented fuel injection cars can climb far beyond that. Now, think about this carefully. Between the three we've just seen, the formal yet brutal Chrysler C300, the excessive and ultra-rare DeSoto Adventurer, and the technological Pontiac Bonneville, if you had to choose one in 1958, paying with your own money, which one would you pick? Tell me in the comments. I want to know which of these powerful luxuries best represents your idea of the 1950s. 1959 Ford Galaxy Skyliner retractable. Now we enter one of the most ambitious, and expensive projects of the entire decade. This wasn't simply a convertible, it was a convertible with a fully electric retractable hardtop. And in 1959, that was nearly futuristic technology. Its price hovered around $3,100 to $3,200 in its final year of production. It may not sound as extreme as other cars on this list, but adjusted for inflation, we're talking about roughly $36,000 to $47,000 today. The difference is that here, you weren't just paying for luxury. You were paying for complex engineering. The roof system used multiple electric motors, relays, and synchronized mechanisms that allowed the metal top to disappear into the trunk at the push of a button. It was spectacular and very expensive to build. In fact, Ford made little to no profit on each unit sold due to the cost of the system. Visually, the Skyliner was enormous, wide, and unmistakably late 1950s. Pronounced tail fins, strong road presence, and a silhouette that completely transformed when the roof vanished. It wasn't a lightweight sports car. It was a heavy full-size, but with enough power to move with authority. Total Skyliner production from 1957 to 1959 was relatively limited considering its complexity. Today, a well-preserved Ford Skyliner retractable typically ranges between $40,000 and $75,000, depending largely on the originality of the retractable system, which is also the most expensive component to restore. It wasn't the most powerful car of the decade. It wasn't the most exclusive, but it was one of the most technologically ambitious projects ever offered to the American public in the 1950s. 1956 Packard Caribbean. When talking about expensive cars in the 1950s, the Caribbean doesn't just enter the conversation, it elevates it. In 1956, it carried an approximate price of $5,995. To give you clear perspective, that was Cadillac Eldorado territory, and, in some cases, even higher. Adjusted for inflation, we're talking about roughly $68,000 to $82,000 today. That placed it directly at the very top of the American market. Visually, it was anything but discreet. Tri-tone color schemes, generous chrome, flowing lines, and a low stance that made it look more sophisticated than most rivals. This wasn't a restrained car, it was a car that wanted to be seen, but with class. Yet what truly mattered was beneath the hood. In 1956, it came equipped with a 374 cubic inch V8, capable of producing up to 310 horsepower. By the mid-1950s, that was an impressive number for a luxury convertible. It wasn't just elegant, it was fast. And here comes the detail that truly turns it into a collector's piece. Approximately 276 units were produced in 1956. That's it. Which makes it one of the rarest luxury convertibles of the entire decade. Packard was already facing serious financial trouble, and the Caribbean represented one of its final attempts to prove it could still compete at the highest level. Today, a well-preserved 1956 Packard Caribbean can easily range between $90,000 and $150,000, with exceptional examples surpassing that at major auctions. 1959 Cadillac Eldorado Biarritz. And now, we arrive at one of the definitive symbols of American luxury in the 1950s. The Eldorado Biarritz wasn't simply expensive, It was a public declaration of success. In 1959, its price hovered around $7,401. To put that into perspective, it was more expensive than most American cars available, and nearly twice the price of many standard models. Adjusted for inflation, we're talking about roughly $80,000 to $90,000 today. But the number doesn't tell the whole story. Visually, it's impossible to ignore. Gigantic tail fins, abundant chrome, exaggerated proportions, and a presence that looks straight out of a futuristic film. It is probably the car that best represents the aesthetic excess of the late 50s, a massive, heavy convertible, and surprisingly quick for its size. It wasn't a sports car, but it certainly wasn't slow. Production was relatively limited for a vehicle at this level. Around 1,320 Biarritz units were built in 1959. Today, a well-preserved 1959 Eldorado Biarritz typically ranges between $120,000 and $200,000, with exceptional examples surpassing that at international auctions. Now, I want you to compare it with the Packard we just saw. If you had the money in 1959 to choose, would you prefer the absolute extravagance and giant fins of the Cadillac, or the far rarer exclusivity of the Packard Caribbean? Tell me in the comments. 1957. Chrysler Imperial Crown. Here we step into another level of formality. This car wasn't trying to impress with youthful extravagance. It aimed to command respect. In 1957, its price ranged between $5,400 and $5,800, depending on configuration. Adjusted for inflation, that equals roughly $58,000 to $72,000 today. That placed it directly in the highest tier of American luxury. Visually, it was enormous, low, and dominant. The fins were present, yes, but integrated into a long, solid body that communicated authority rather than spectacle. And under the hood, the story was just as serious. It came equipped with a 392 cubic inch HEMI V8 capable of delivering around 325 horsepower. In a formal luxury sedan, or coupe, it didn't need to brag about speed. It had it. Today, a well-preserved 1957 Imperial Crown typically falls between $60,000 and $110,000, depending on condition and originality. 1958 Dual-Ghia. And now, we shift categories entirely. Because the Dual-Ghia wasn't simply expensive, it was exclusive on an almost handcrafted level. In 1958, its price hovered around $7,500. To understand what that meant, it was more expensive than most Cadillacs, pricier than many Imperials, and firmly in European luxury territory. Adjusted for inflation, we're talking about roughly $82,000 to $95,000 today. But the price isn't the most impressive part. The Dual-Ghia was a car that was practically hand-built. The body was designed by Ghia in Italy, shipped to the United States, and assembled with Chrysler mechanical components. It was a strange and sophisticated blend. Refined European styling, with an American heart, low, clean, elegant, almost discreet compared to the giants of Detroit. Under the hood sat a Chrysler 383 cubic inch V8, producing around 335 horsepower. It wasn't just a design object. It delivered serious performance. And here's the detail that turns it into a legend. Approximately 117 units were produced in total. That's it. It was a car primarily purchased by celebrities, business magnates, and public figures. Not a typical dealership vehicle. It was a made-to-order automobile. Today, a well-preserved Dual-Ghia can easily exceed $200,000, with exceptional examples climbing far beyond that at international auctions. It wasn't a massive commercial success. It wasn't a dominant brand, but it was one of the most exclusive, expensive, and sophisticated American cars of the entire decade. 1956 Lincoln Continental Mark II. If there was a car in the 1950s born with the explicit intention of being the most expensive, the most exclusive, and the most refined in the American market, it was this one. It wasn't designed to compete with Cadillac. It was designed to surpass it in prestige. When it launched in 1956, its base price was approximately $10,000. Now, let's put that into perspective. In 1956, a Cadillac Series 62 cost around $4,000. An average home in many states could be purchased for less than $12,000. This Lincoln cost practically the same as a brand new house. Adjusted for inflation, those $10,000 equal roughly $115,000 to $130,000 today. But here's the fascinating part. Lincoln lost money on every unit sold. Yes, lost money. The Mark II was built almost by hand, with a level of quality control and finishing that bordered on obsessive. Every car went through individual inspections. Every panel was fitted with extreme precision. This wasn't mass production. It was nearly bespoke manufacturing. Visually, the car was restrained, almost minimalist. Its elegance lived in its perfect proportions, its clean lines, and that integrated spare tire in the trunk lid that became a signature design element. This was serious luxury, quiet, intimidating. And here's another key detail. Only 3,005 units were produced in 1956 and 444 in 1957. Extremely limited for an American car of that era. Today, a Continental Mark II in excellent condition typically ranges between $70,000 and $150,000, depending on originality and restoration. Some exceptional examples exceed that figure, but the true value of the Mark II isn't just in its current price. It's in what it represented. It was built to prove that the United States could create a car as refined as any European automobile, without relying on excess. 1957 Cadillac Eldorado Brougham. Now, imagine this. It's 1957. Most American cars cost between $3,000 and $5,000. And suddenly, Cadillac arrives with a model priced at over $13,000. Yes, over $13,000. At the time, that was practically the cost of an entire house in many parts of the United States. The Eldorado Brougham wasn't simply expensive. It was outrageously expensive. Its official price hovered around $13,074 in 1957. Adjusted for inflation, we're talking about roughly $150,000 to $170,000 today. And it wasn't just about brand or prestige. It was technology. It was excess. It was a demonstration of power. This Cadillac came with air suspension, when almost no one even knew what that was. Power seats with memory, rear suicide doors, a brushed stainless steel roof, even a small set of fragrances inside the glove box. It felt like a concept car brought straight into production. Visually, it looked unlike anything else. Lower, more modern, more daring. Not the typical classic elegant Cadillac. This was futuristic, almost experimental. Under the hood sat a 365 cubic inch V8, producing around 325 horsepower. Powerful, smooth, perfectly aligned with its level of luxury. Only 400 units were built in 1957 and just over 300 in 1958. Cadillac lost money on each one. Today, a well-preserved Eldorado Brougham can easily surpass $200,000 depending on condition and documentation. The 1950s weren't just a decade of style, they were a decade of ambition. As America expanded, some automakers decided that luxury didn't have to be reasonable. It had to be absolute. Cars that cost absurd amounts for their time. Cars built in incredibly low numbers. Cars never meant for everyone, only for a very select few. And now, I want to ask you the final question. If you could travel back in time and walk into a dealership in 1958 with cash in hand, which of these cars would you choose without even looking at the price? Which one best represents your idea of absolute 1950s luxury? Tell me in the comments. I want to know which of these giants you'd drive straight into your garage. And if you enjoyed this journey through the most expensive cars of the decade, I recommend watching the video appearing on your screen right now. There, we explore the most beautiful American cars of the 1950s. Because luxury can impress, but beauty is what truly makes a car eternal. See you in the next video.